Hello, my name is Sophia. I'm 34 years old, a struggling artist living in a rundown studio apartment in Portland, Oregon. When I say artist, I don't mean someone who sells paintings in fancy galleries or has exhibitions in museums. I'm just a woman with paint-stained fingers and dreams bigger than my bank account, spending my days creating watercolor portraits that nobody seems to want to buy. I have 2 daughters who are my entire universe. Isabella is 7 years old, with wild curly red hair that refuses to be tamed and freckles scattered across her nose like tiny stars. She has this infectious laugh that can brighten even my darkest days, and she believes with all her heart that I'm the most talented artist in the world. Then there's Grace, my 4-year-old angel with platinum blonde hair and the bluest eyes you've ever seen. She's quieter than Isabella, preferring to sit beside me while I paint, asking endless questions about colors and why the sky changes from blue to pink at sunset. My life wasn't always like this. 2 years ago, I was married to Marcus, a successful architect who promised me the world. We lived in a beautiful house in the suburbs, with a white picket fence and a garden where the girls could play. I had my own art studio in the converted garage, and for a brief moment, I thought I had everything I ever wanted. If you've ever been betrayed by those you loved most, drop a comment below telling me where you're watching from. Hit that like and subscribe button if you're ready to hear how I finally stood up for myself after years of manipulation. But Marcus had dreams that didn't include a struggling artist wife and 2 young children. He met someone at his firm, a brilliant structural engineer named Victoria, who shared his ambitions and his vision of success. One cold February evening, he sat me down at our kitchen table and told me he was leaving. "Sophia," he said, his voice clinical and detached, "I need someone who can match my drive, someone who understands success. You're a dreamer, and I can't afford to be held back by dreams anymore." He moved out that same week, taking half of everything and leaving me with custody of Isabella and Grace. The divorce settlement barely covered the apartment I'm in now, and the child support he sends is sporadic at best. When I call him about it, he always has an excuse: a business trip, a project running over budget, or simply that he forgot. I stopped calling months ago. Our apartment is tiny, just 1 bedroom that I've split with a curtain so the girls have some privacy. I sleep on the pull-out couch in the living room, which doubles as my art studio during the day. The walls are covered with my paintings, landscapes, portraits, abstract pieces that I pour my soul into, hoping that someday someone will see their value. But rent is $1,200 a month, and my art sales barely bring in $300 on a good month. To make ends meet, I work 3 part-time jobs. In the mornings, after I drop the girls at school and daycare, I clean offices downtown. The work is mindless and exhausting, scrubbing toilets and emptying trash cans while wearing rubber gloves that make my hands smell like bleach. In the afternoons, I work at a coffee shop called Bean There, serving lattes to hipsters and tourists who treat me like I'm invisible. And in the evenings, after the girls are asleep, I do freelance graphic design work on my ancient laptop, creating logos and business cards for clients who always want revisions and rarely pay on time. The hardest part isn't the exhaustion or the constant worry about money. It's the loneliness. My parents live across the country in Boston, and we haven't spoken since the divorce. They never approved of Marcus, but they approved of my marriage to him even less when it ended. "You should have tried harder," my mother said during our last phone call. "Marriage is work, Sophia. You can't just give up when things get difficult." They don't understand that I didn't give up, I was abandoned. My sister Rachel lives in Seattle, just a few hours away, but she's busy with her own family and her demanding job as a surgeon. We exchange Christmas cards and birthday wishes, but I've learned not to call when I'm drowning. The last time I asked for help, she sent me a check for $500 with a note that said, "I hope this helps, but I can't keep bailing you out." I never cashed it. Isabella and Grace don't know how precarious our situation really is. I've become an expert at making everything seem like an adventure. When we eat cereal for dinner, I call it breakfast night. When we can't afford to go to the movies, we make popcorn and watch old films on my laptop, pretending our couch is a theater. When the heating bill gets too high in winter, we have camping nights where we all sleep in my bed under every blanket we own. But children are perceptive, and I see the worry in Isabella's eyes when she asks why we can't buy the name-brand cereals like her friends at school. I see Grace clinging to her worn stuffed rabbit, whispering to it when she thinks I'm not listening. They know something is wrong, even if they don't understand what. I keep painting because it's the only thing that keeps me sane. When I hold a brush in my hand and watch colors blend on paper, I can forget about past due notices and empty refrigerators. I can lose myself in the way light hits a subject's face or how shadows dance across a landscape. Each painting is a piece of my soul, a hope that maybe this time, someone will see what I see and want to take it home. The art community in Portland is vibrant, but it's also incredibly competitive. I've applied to dozens of galleries, sent my portfolio to hundreds of art shows, and posted my work on every online platform I can find. I get the occasional compliment or like, but likes don't pay rent. I've started wondering if I'm deluding myself, if maybe Marcus was right and I'm just a dreamer who can't face reality. But then Isabella will come home from school and ask to see my latest painting, her eyes wide with wonder as she traces the brushstrokes with her finger. Or Grace will climb into my lap while I'm working and ask me to paint a picture of our family, all three of us smiling under a rainbow. In those moments, I remember why I started painting in the first place. Not for fame or money, but because art is how I see the world, how I make sense of beauty and pain and everything in between. Some nights, after the girls are asleep and the apartment is quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of traffic, I sit in front of my easel and let myself cry. I cry for the dreams that feel so far away, for the security I can't provide my daughters, for the loneliness that seems to grow heavier each day. But then I pick up my brush and start painting again because what else can I do? I paint because I have to, because it's the only way I know how to hope. One particularly cold October morning, everything changed. Isabella woke up complaining that her tummy hurt. At first, I thought it was just nerves about a test at school, or maybe she'd eaten too much Halloween candy the night before. But by lunchtime, when the daycare called to say she had a fever and was asking for me, I knew something was seriously wrong. I picked up Isabella and Grace and rushed to the emergency room at Providence Portland Medical Center. Isabella was burning up, her usually bright eyes glazed with fever. She kept saying her stomach hurt, but she couldn't explain exactly where or how. Grace clung to my hand, her blue eyes wide with fear as we waited in the crowded ER. After what felt like hours, we were finally seen by Dr. Catherine Chen, a kind-faced woman in her 40s who immediately made Isabella laugh by drawing a smiley face on her stethoscope. But her expression grew serious as she examined my daughter, pressing gently on her abdomen and asking questions about her symptoms. "I'd like to run some tests," Dr. Chen said, her voice carefully neutral. "It could be appendicitis, but I want to rule out other possibilities as well." Other possibilities. The word sent a chill down my spine, but I forced myself to smile for Isabella's sake. "It's going to be okay, sweetheart," I whispered, stroking her curly red hair. "The doctors are going to figure out what's wrong and make you feel better." The tests came back showing elevated white blood cell counts and abnormal markers that Dr. Chen said required further investigation. Isabella was admitted to the hospital for observation and more comprehensive testing. I called in sick to all three of my jobs, knowing I couldn't leave her side but also knowing that each day away from work meant less money for rent and groceries. Grace and I camped out in Isabella's hospital room, sleeping in uncomfortable chairs and eating vending machine sandwiches. Grace was confused and scared, asking over and over when we could go home. I tried to keep her occupied with coloring books and stories, but the hospital environment was overwhelming for a 4-year-old. On the third day, Dr. Chen asked to speak with me privately. We stepped into a small consultation room, and I could tell by her expression that the news wasn't good. "Sophia," she began gently, "the test results show that Isabella has acute lymphoblastic leukemia. It's a type of blood cancer that's most common in children." The world stopped. Cancer. My 7-year-old daughter had cancer. I heard Dr. Chen explaining about treatment options and survival rates, but her words sounded like they were coming from underwater. All I could think about was Isabella's laugh, her dreams of becoming an artist like me, the way she hugged her stuffed animals and told them stories before bed. What does this mean? I managed to ask, my voice barely a whisper. It means Isabella will need immediate and intensive treatment, Dr. Chin explained. Chemotherapy, possibly radiation, and extended hospital stays. The good news is that childhood leukemia has high cure rates when caught early, but the treatment process is going to be challenging for all of you. I thought about my 3 part-time jobs, my tiny apartment, my non-existent savings account. How was I supposed to afford cancer treatment? How was I supposed to care for Isabella while also taking care of Grace and keeping a roof over our heads? That night I called Marcus for the first time in months. My hands shook as I dialed his number, and when he answered I could hear the sounds of a restaurant in the background, probably out to dinner with Victoria. Marcus, I said, trying to keep my voice steady, Isabella is in the hospital. She has leukemia. I need your help. There was a pause, and then he sighed. Sophia, I'm sorry to hear that, I really am. But you know my situation. Victoria and I are planning our wedding, and I've got the down payment for our new house tied up in investments. I can try to send a little extra child support next month, but… Your daughter has cancer, I interrupted, my voice rising. She's 7 years old, Marcus. She's scared and she's sick and she needs her father. I'll try to visit when I can, he said, but I could hear the insincerity in his voice. Look, I have to go. We're meeting with the wedding planner. I'll call you later, okay? He hung up and I sat in the hospital hallway, holding my phone and fighting back tears. Grace was asleep in Isabella's room, curled up in the chair with her stuffed rabbit. Isabella was finally resting peacefully for the first time in days, her fever broken but her future uncertain. I tried calling my parents, hoping that maybe their granddaughter's illness would bridge the gap between us. My mother answered on the 3rd ring. Mom, I said, I'm calling about Isabella. She's in the hospital. She has leukemia. Oh my God, she breathed. Sophia, I'm so sorry. How is she? How are you? For a moment, I thought maybe this crisis would bring us together. I told her about the diagnosis, the treatment plan, my fears about managing everything alone. She listened, made sympathetic sounds, and then said the words that shattered my last hope. Honey, I wish we could be there, but your father's arthritis has been acting up, and we just can't handle the stress of travel right now. We'll send prayers and maybe a care package. You're strong, Sophia. You'll figure it out. Strong. Everyone always told me I was strong, as if strength was something I could deposit in the bank or use to pay for chemotherapy treatments. I hung up feeling more alone than ever. The only person who seemed to truly understand was Maya Rodriguez, Isabella's primary nurse. Maya was about my age, with kind brown eyes and a gentle manner that immediately put both my daughters at ease. She worked the day shift and always made time to explain procedures to Isabella in ways a 7-year-old could understand. The medicine might make you feel sleepy, Maya would say, drawing pictures to illustrate her explanations, but it's like having tiny superheroes in your body fighting the bad cells. Maya also seemed to sense my desperation. She brought Grace coloring books from the pediatric wing and showed me where I could get free meals in the hospital cafeteria. When she noticed that I was trying to work on my laptop during Isabella's treatments, she quietly found me a more comfortable chair and made sure I had access to the hospital's Wi-Fi. How are you holding up? She asked one afternoon as Isabella slept after her first round of chemotherapy. I wanted to lie to say I was fine like I always did, but something about Maya's genuine concern broke down my defenses. I don't know how I'm going to do this, I admitted. I can't work, but I can't leave her. I don't have family support and her father. I trailed off, not wanting to badmouth Marcus in front of the girls, even though Grace was absorbed in her coloring. Maya nodded understandingly. Have you looked into the hospital's financial assistance programs? And there are organizations that help families dealing with childhood cancer. Let me get you some information. That evening, Maya brought me a folder full of resources. Financial aid applications, support groups for parents, organizations that provided meals and temporary housing for families with hospitalized children. For the first time since the diagnosis, I felt like maybe I wasn't completely alone. Isabella's treatment was aggressive and grueling. She lost her beautiful red curls within the first month, and I watched my vibrant, energetic daughter become pale and weak. But she never lost her spirit entirely. She named her four-pole Ivy and pretended it was her robot friend. She asked me to bring my paints to the hospital so she could watch me work, and she started creating her own art with the supplies the child life specialists provided. "Mommy," she said one day as I painted a small watercolor of the view from her hospital window, "when I get better, can we paint together every day?" "Every single day," I promised, kissing her bald head. Grace struggled with the upheaval in our lives. She wet the bed for the first time in over a year and became increasingly clingy, crying whenever I left her sight even for a few minutes. I tried to maintain some normalcy for her, but it was impossible when our entire world revolved around the hospital. The financial stress was crushing. Even with the assistance programs Maya had found for us, I was drowning in medical bills and had no income coming in. I'd been fired from the coffee shop for missing too many shifts, and my cleaning job had been given to someone more reliable. I was barely managing to keep up with my freelance design work, stealing moments between treatments and sleepless nights to complete projects. One evening, about 6 weeks into Isabella's treatment, I sat in the hospital cafeteria with my laptop, trying to finish a logo design for a client who had already extended my deadline twice. Grace was asleep in Isabella's room, and Isabella was finally resting peacefully after a particularly difficult day of treatment. Maya found me there, staring at my computer screen with tears in my eyes. "Sophia," she said gently, sitting down across from me. "What's wrong?" "I can't do this," I whispered. "I'm failing at everything. I can't work enough to pay our bills, I can't be the strong mother Isabella needs, I can't give Grace the attention she deserves. I'm watching my daughter fight for her life, and I can't even afford to keep our apartment." Maya reached across the table and took my hand. "You're not failing," she said firmly. "You're dealing with an impossible situation and you're doing it alone. That doesn't make you weak, it makes you incredible." She paused, seeming to consider something. "Can I tell you about my brother?" she asked. I nodded, grateful for any distraction from my spiraling thoughts. "Miguel was diagnosed with leukemia when he was 8, Maya said. "My mom was a single parent, working 2 jobs, barely keeping us afloat. When Miguel got sick, everything fell apart. We lost our apartment, had to move in with my grandmother, and my mom had a breakdown. I was 12 and I thought the world was ending." "What happened?" I asked. "Miguel fought and he won. He's 25 now, married, with a baby on the way. But the thing is, it wasn't just his fight. It was all of ours. And we all changed because of it. My mom learned to ask for help, which she'd never done before. I learned that I wanted to be a nurse, to help other families going through what we went through. And Miguel learned how precious life is." She squeezed my hand. "What I'm saying is, this crisis doesn't have to destroy you. It can transform you if you let it." That night I started writing. I don't know what prompted it. Maybe it was Maya's story, or maybe I just needed an outlet for all the emotions I'd been holding inside. I wrote about Isabella's diagnosis, about the fear and the helplessness and the small moments of hope. I wrote about Grace's confusion and resilience, about the kindness of strangers like Maya, about the crushing loneliness of facing your worst nightmare alone. I wrote in the hospital room while the girls slept, in the cafeteria during Isabella's treatments, on my phone while waiting for test results. The words poured out of me like water through a broken dam, and for the first time in months, I felt like I was creating something meaningful again. Isabella's treatment continued for months. There were good days and bad days, setbacks and small victories. We celebrated when her white blood cell counts improved, and we held each other when the side effects of chemotherapy made her too sick to eat. Grace started attending a support group for siblings of children with cancer, which helped her understand what was happening and gave her tools to cope with her own fears and feelings. Slowly, gradually, Isabella began to improve. Her energy returned in small increments, and she started asking to walk around the hospital ward instead of being confined to her bed. Her hair began to grow back, a soft fuzz that she constantly touched in wonder. And then came the day Dr. Chin told us that Isabella was in remission. The cancer cells are no longer detectable in Isabella's blood, she explained, her professional demeanor cracking slightly to reveal her own joy. She'll need to continue with maintenance therapy for a while, but this is the news we've been hoping for. Isabella whooped with joy and Grace started crying happy tears. I just held both my daughters, overwhelmed with relief and gratitude and the strange emptiness that comes after living in crisis mode for so long. During the long months of treatment, my writing had evolved from desperate journaling into something more structured. I found myself crafting chapters, developing themes, creating a narrative about our journey that felt both deeply personal and universally relatable. Maya had read some of my pages and encouraged me to consider publishing them. This could help other families, she said. You have a way of describing the experience that makes people feel less alone. I was resistant at first. Who was I to think my story was worth publishing? I was just a struggling single mother who had barely managed to keep her family together. But as Isabella's health improved and we prepared to leave the hospital environment that had become our second home, I found myself returning to the manuscript again and again. With Isabella in remission and able to return to school, I had to figure out how to rebuild our life. We'd lost our apartment during her treatment. I simply couldn't keep up with the rent while spending all my time at the hospital. The hospital social worker had helped us find temporary housing in a transitional facility for families in crisis, but it was only meant to be a short-term solution. I was facing the same challenges as before, but now with the added burden of Isabella's ongoing medical needs and my own emotional exhaustion. I applied for jobs, but explaining the gap in my employment history was complicated, and many employers were hesitant to hire someone whose child had ongoing health issues. Maya continued to be a source of support, even though Isabella was no longer her patient. She invited us for dinner at her apartment, included us in her family gatherings, and became the friend I desperately needed. She also continued to encourage my writing. You should submit this to publishers, she said one evening as she read through my latest draft. This is powerful, Sophia. It deserves to be shared. I laughed, but it was a bitter sound. Maya, I can barely afford groceries. I'm living in transitional housing with my daughters. What publisher is going to take a chance on a book by someone like me? Someone like you? Maya raised an eyebrow. You mean someone who's survived one of the most challenging experiences a parent can face? Someone who's found a way to turn trauma into art, pain into purpose? That's exactly the kind of person whose story needs to be told. Her confidence in me was both inspiring and terrifying. I had dreamed of being a published author once, back when I thought dreams were things that could come true if you just worked hard enough. But life had taught me that dreams were luxuries I couldn't afford. Still, I couldn't stop writing. Even when we moved into a small 2-bedroom apartment in a less-than-ideal neighborhood, even when I took a job as a night security guard at an office building so I could work while the girls slept, I continued working on my book. I wrote about the nights I thought I would lose Isabella, about Grace's resilience, about the healthcare workers who became our family when our real family failed us. I also wrote about the unexpected gifts that came from our crisis. The way Isabella's illness had taught us to appreciate small moments. The friendships we'd formed with other families in the pediatric ward. The strength I'd discovered in myself that I never knew existed. The way Grace had developed empathy and compassion beyond her years. 1 year after Isabella's diagnosis, I finally worked up the courage to submit my manuscript to publishers. I researched small presses that specialized in memoirs and family stories, crafted query letters that attempted to capture the essence of our journey, and sent my words out into the world with no expectations. The rejections came quickly and consistently. Not quite right for our list. Doesn't fit our current needs. Thanks, but no thanks. Each rejection stung, but I'd been rejected before, by my ex-husband, by my family, by employers and galleries, and countless others. I was developing a thick skin when it came to people saying no. But then, on a rainy Tuesday morning in March, I received an email that changed everything. A small publishing house in Seattle had read my manuscript and wanted to schedule a phone call to discuss it further. "Ms. Chen," the editor, Julia Morrison, said when we spoke, "your story moved our entire team to tears. We don't often publish memoirs by unknown authors, but there's something about your voice, your honesty, that we think readers need to hear." I was so shocked I could barely speak. "You want to publish my book?" "We do," Julia confirmed. "It won't make you rich, we're a small press with limited resources, but we believe in this story and we want to help you share it with the world." The advance was modest, but it was more money than I'd seen in one place since my divorce. More importantly, it was validation that our story mattered, that the pain we'd endured had meaning beyond our own experience. When the Lights Went Out, A Mother's Journey Through Her Child's Cancer was published 8 months later. The title came from something Isabella had said during her treatment when the medication made her too tired to keep her eyes open. "Mommy, it's like someone turned off the lights, but I can still see you." The book found its audience slowly, through word of mouth and recommendations from cancer support groups. Parents who were facing their own children's diagnoses found comfort in our story. Healthcare workers recommended it to families in their care. Gradually, the book began to sell. The first speaking engagement came from a local support group for parents of children with cancer. I was terrified. I'd never spoken publicly about our experience, and the thought of standing in front of strangers and reliving the darkest period of our lives made my stomach churn. But Maya encouraged me, and Isabella, now 9 and full of confidence, insisted I should tell everyone how brave we were. The community center where the support group met was small and cramped, with fluorescent lights that buzzed overhead and the lingering smell of coffee and industrial carpet. About 20 parents filled the folding chairs arranged in a circle, their faces carrying the same exhausted, haunted expression I remembered from my own reflection during Isabella's treatment. As I spoke about our journey, the initial diagnosis, the fear, the isolation, the moments of unexpected grace, I watched these parents nod in recognition. A father whose 5-year-old son was just beginning treatment wiped away tears when I described the first time Isabella lost her hair. A mother whose daughter was in remission reached for her husband's hand when I talked about the constant fear of relapse. After my presentation, they surrounded me with questions and stories. "How did you explain the diagnosis to your other child? What helped you sleep at night when the fear was overwhelming? How did you find strength when you felt like you had nothing left to give?" I realized that night that our story wasn't just ours anymore. It belonged to every parent who had sat in a hospital room watching their child fight for their life, every family who had faced medical bills they couldn't afford, every person who had been abandoned by those they thought they could count on. The speaking engagements multiplied. Children's hospitals began inviting me to address newly diagnosed families. Medical conferences asked me to speak about the patient perspective. Parent support groups across the Pacific Northwest reached out for workshops on coping with pediatric cancer. Each time I shared our story, I learned something new from the families I met. A single father from Seattle whose 4-year-old daughter was battling brain cancer taught me about the power of maintaining routine and normalcy during treatment. A military family whose son was receiving care while they were stationed overseas showed me how love transcends distance and circumstance. An immigrant mother who spoke limited English but whose devotion to her sick child was universal reminded me that a parent's love needs no translation. The financial impact of the book was modest but meaningful. For the first time since Marcus left, I wasn't living paycheck to paycheck. I could buy name-brand groceries without calculating the cost difference. I could take the girls out for pizza on Friday nights without worrying about the rent money. Small luxuries, perhaps, but they represented freedom from the constant anxiety that had defined our lives for so long. More importantly, the book gave me a sense of purpose I hadn't felt since before my marriage fell apart. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was contributing something meaningful to the world. Parents would email me months after reading the book, updating me on their children's progress, thanking me for helping them feel less alone in their darkest moments. One letter particularly moved me. It was from a mother named Jennifer whose 8-year-old son had been diagnosed with the same type of leukemia as Isabella. She wrote, "Your book found me on the worst day of my life. I had just been told that my son's treatment wasn't working as well as hoped, and I was sitting in my car in the hospital parking lot, completely falling apart. A friend had given me your book weeks earlier, but I hadn't been able to face reading it. That day I finally opened it and it saved me. Not because it promised everything would be okay, but because it showed me that other people had walked this path and survived. It gave me permission to be scared and angry and heartbroken, but also to keep hoping. These connections with other families became the most rewarding aspect of my unexpected career as an author and speaker. I started a private Facebook group for parents who had read the book, which grew into a thriving community of mutual support. We celebrated remissions and successful treatments, mourned losses together, and shared practical advice about everything from managing side effects to explaining cancer to siblings. Maya often accompanied me to speaking events, sharing her perspective as a healthcare provider who had witnessed our journey from the beginning. Her insights about the importance of treating the whole family, not just the patient, resonated deeply with medical professionals. Together, we began developing workshops for hospital staff about supporting families through pediatric cancer treatment. The second year after the book's publication brought unexpected opportunities. A documentary filmmaker who had lost his own child to cancer reached out about creating a film based on our story. While the prospect was both exciting and terrifying, I ultimately decided that our story was too personal, too sacred, to be translated to film. Instead, I encouraged him to create a broader documentary about childhood cancer that would include multiple family stories, including ours as just one thread in a larger tapestry. For the first time since my marriage ended, I felt like I had a purpose beyond just surviving. The success of the book, while modest by bestseller standards, gave us stability we hadn't known in years. I was able to rent a larger apartment in a better neighborhood, one where Isabella and Grace could each have their own room, and I could set up a proper art studio in the spare bedroom. I reduced my security guard hours and began speaking engagements about our experience. Isabella, now cancer-free for over 2 years, threw herself back into art with a passion that rivaled my own. Her experience with illness had given her work a depth and emotional resonance that was remarkable for someone so young. She painted self-portraits showing her journey from diagnosis through recovery, and her piece titled Ivy and Me, depicting her friendship with her four-pole, was selected for a youth art exhibition in Portland. Grace, now 7 herself, had grown into a thoughtful, empathetic child who seemed to understand the fragility and preciousness of life in ways that other children didn't. She started a kindness club at her school, organizing toy drives for children in the hospital and visiting elderly residents at a nearby nursing home. Maya remained a central part of our lives, and our friendship had deepened into something that felt like family. She was there for Isabella's annual checkups, cheering louder than anyone when the test results continued to show no signs of cancer. She was there for Grace's school plays and art shows, and she was there for me when the weight of everything we'd been through sometimes felt overwhelming. "You know," Maya said one evening as we watched the girls play in the backyard of our new home, "I think about my brother's illness differently now after watching your journey." "How so?" I asked. "I used to think it was just something terrible that happened to our family," she said. "But seeing how you've transformed your experience into something meaningful, something that helps others, I think maybe trauma can be a teacher if we're brave enough to listen to its lessons." I nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. Isabella's cancer had nearly destroyed us, but it had also revealed strengths and connections and purposes we never would have discovered otherwise. It had taught us that family isn't always about blood relationships. Sometimes it's about the people who show up when everything falls apart. As I wrote this, Isabella was upstairs in her room, working on a painting for her upcoming solo exhibition at a local community center. At 10 years old, she was already being recognized as a talented young artist, but more than that, she was a survivor who had learned to find beauty even in the darkest places. As I wrote this, Isabella was upstairs in her room, working on a painting for her upcoming solo exhibition at a local community center. At 10 years old, she was already being recognized as a talented young artist, but more than that, she was a survivor who had learned to find beauty even in the darkest places. The solo exhibition had come about through an unexpected chain of events. Dr. Patricia Williams, a child psychologist who worked with pediatric cancer patients, had seen some of Isabella's artwork during one of our follow-up visits. Isabella had been doodling in the waiting room, creating intricate drawings of flowers growing from cracks in sidewalks, a metaphor that wasn't lost on any of us. Has anyone ever suggested that Isabella's art could be therapeutic for other children? Dr. Williams had asked me privately. Her visual storytelling about her cancer journey is remarkable. I think other kids going through treatment could really benefit from seeing how she's processed her experience through art. That conversation led to Isabella's first public showing of her work, a small display in the pediatric oncology waiting room at the hospital where she'd been treated. The response was overwhelming. Children and parents alike were drawn to her honest, hopeful depictions of the cancer experience. Her piece titled "The Day My Hair Said Goodbye," a whimsical portrait of herself waving farewell to her falling curls, made both children and adults cry and laugh simultaneously. Word of Isabella's exhibition spread through the hospital community, and soon she was invited to display her work at other medical facilities throughout the city. Each showing brought new connections and opportunities. A local gallery owner who had been through cancer treatment herself offered Isabella wall space for a proper solo exhibition. The community center where I had given my first speaking engagement asked if Isabella would be interested in teaching art workshops for children dealing with serious illnesses. "Mommy," Isabella said one evening as we prepared pieces for her upcoming exhibition, "I think my cancer was really sad and scary, but I'm glad it happened because now I can help other kids not feel so alone." Her matter-of-fact acceptance of how her trauma had transformed into purpose both broke my heart and filled me with pride. At 10 years old, she had already learned lessons about resilience and meaning-making that many adults never master. Grace, meanwhile, had developed into an extraordinary young person in her own right. Now 8 years old, she possessed an emotional intelligence and empathy that consistently amazed me. Her experience as a sibling of a child with cancer had shaped her in profound ways. She had learned early that life could be fragile and unfair, but also that love and support could carry people through the darkest times. Her kindness club at school had evolved into something much more significant. What started as simple toy drives had grown into a comprehensive community service program. Grace organized monthly visits to the pediatric ward, where she and her classmates would read stories to younger patients and help them with art projects. She had convinced her teacher to partner with a local homeless shelter, and her class now prepared and served meals there once a month. "Grace has an unusual ability to connect with people who are suffering," her teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, told me during a parent conference. "She seems to understand that everyone has struggles, and she responds with genuine compassion rather than pity. It's quite remarkable for someone her age." I knew Grace's empathy came from her early exposure to crisis and uncertainty. She had watched her sister face a life-threatening illness, had seen our family navigate financial hardship and social isolation, had witnessed the kindness of strangers like Maya who became family. These experiences had taught her that people needed each other, especially during difficult times. The success of my book had also brought unexpected romantic complications into my life. For years after Marcus left, I had been too exhausted, too focused on survival, and too hurt to even consider dating. The idea of trusting someone with my heart, and more importantly, with my daughter's hearts, seemed impossible. But success brought visibility, and visibility brought attention from men who were intrigued by my story. Some were drawn to the idea of rescuing a single mother and her children, a dynamic that made me immediately uncomfortable. Others seemed more interested in my minor celebrity status than in getting to know the real me. The most persistent was David Chen, an attorney who had heard me speak at a conference about healthcare advocacy. He was intelligent, successful, and seemed genuinely interested in my work. He sent thoughtful emails about my book, attended several of my speaking engagements, and eventually asked me out for coffee. "I admire what you've built from such difficult circumstances," he said during our first date. "It takes incredible strength to transform trauma into something positive." David was charming and attentive, and he made an obvious effort to connect with Isabella and Grace. He brought them books and art supplies, attended Isabella's art showings, and praised Grace's community service projects. On the surface, he seemed like exactly the kind of stable, supportive partner I thought we needed. But something felt off. Despite his apparent interest in my work and my daughters, I sensed that David was more attracted to the idea of our story than to the reality of our lives. He spoke about our experience in ways that felt romanticized, as if our struggle and survival were somehow noble and inspiring rather than painful and complicated. The turning point came 6 months into our relationship, when Isabella had a routine follow-up appointment that revealed some unusual blood work. It was likely nothing serious, just a minor fluctuation that required monitoring, but any deviation from normal results sent our entire family into panic mode. I called David to let him know about the appointment results, expecting support and understanding. Instead, he seemed frustrated by my anxiety. "Sophia," he said, "you can't live in fear forever. Isabella's been in remission for years. You need to move on and stop letting cancer control your life." His words revealed a fundamental misunderstanding of what it meant to be a childhood cancer survivor family. The fear never completely goes away. Every headache, every unusual fatigue, every minor symptom triggers memories of the worst period of our lives. It wasn't about living in fear, it was about acknowledging a reality that would always be part of our story. I realized that David was attracted to the sanitized, inspirational version of our journey, the story of triumph over adversity that made for compelling conference presentations. He wasn't prepared for the ongoing complexity of loving a family that would always carry the shadow of serious illness. I ended the relationship shortly after that conversation, much to Maya's relief. She had never said anything negative about David, but I could tell she didn't fully trust his motivations. "You don't need someone who sees you as a project or an inspiration," Maya told me after I explained why things hadn't worked out with David. "You need someone who sees you as a complete person, brilliant and strong, yes, but also complicated and human. Someone who understands that your past isn't something to be fixed or overcome, but something that's made you who you are." Maya's friendship had deepened over the years into something that felt like the sister relationship I'd never had with Rachel. She was there for every milestone and setback, every celebration and crisis. She had become Aunt Maya to the girls, and they adored her with the kind of uncomplicated love that children reserve for adults who truly see and value them. Our friendship had also evolved to include her family. Her brother Miguel, the childhood leukemia survivor whose story had given me hope during Isabella's darkest days, had become a mentor figure for Isabella. Now 27 and working as a graphic designer, Miguel visited regularly and shared his perspective as someone who had walked the path Isabella was on. "The hardest part isn't the treatment," Miguel told Isabella during one of his visits. "It's figuring out who you are after you survive. For a long time, I only saw myself as the kid who had cancer. It took years to realize that experience was just one part of my story, not the whole thing." His words resonated deeply with Isabella, who was beginning to navigate questions about identity and future as she moved further from her treatment years. She was talented and ambitious, but sometimes worried that her cancer history would define her forever. "I want people to see my art first," she told me one evening. "Not art by a cancer survivor, just art by Isabella." I understood her desire to be seen as a complete person rather than a walking inspirational story. It was a struggle I faced in my own career as my book success continued to grow. While I was grateful for the platform my experience had given me, I sometimes yearned to be known for my current work rather than my past trauma. The children's book Isabella and I had collaborated on was finally finding a publisher. After months of rejections, a small press that specialized in books addressing difficult topics for young readers had offered us a contract. Ivy and Me, A Friendship Through Treatment, would be released the following year, with Isabella's illustrations bringing my words to life. Working on the book together had been a profound bonding experience. Isabella's artistic interpretation of our story helped me see it through new eyes. Her illustrations captured not just the sadness and fear of cancer treatment, but also the small moments of joy and connection that had sustained us. I want kids who are scared about being sick to know that they can still have fun and make friends, even in the hospital, Isabella explained as she worked on a drawing of herself and several other young patients having a tea party in the hospital playroom. Being sick doesn't mean you stop being a kid. The book represented a new phase in both our careers as storytellers. While my memoir had spoken primarily to parents and adults, this collaboration would reach children directly, offering them a story that validated their experience and provided hope for their future. Grace, now 8 and increasingly confident in her own voice, had announced that she wanted to write a book too, not about cancer, but about all the different ways families could be formed and sustained. Her idea was to interview families who had been created through adoption, divorce, remarriage, and other non-traditional paths, showing that love and commitment mattered more than conventional structures. Our family is different because Daddy left and Isabella got sick, Grace explained when she pitched her book idea to me. But we're still a real family because we love each other and take care of each other. I think other kids need to know that families come in lots of different shapes. Her wisdom and insight continued to amaze me. At 8 years old, she had already internalized lessons about resilience and adaptability that would serve her well throughout her life. Grace was in the living room, reading a book about children around the world, her latest obsession. She had announced that she wanted to become a doctor like Dr. Chen when she grew up, so she could help other kids who were scared and sick. And I was in my studio, surrounded by canvases and memories and the manuscript for my second book, a children's story about a little girl who befriends her four-pole during cancer treatment. Isabella had illustrated it, and we were hoping to find a publisher who would be interested in our collaboration. Our life wasn't perfect. Isabella still had regular checkups that made us all nervous, and we lived with the knowledge that cancer could return. I still struggled financially, and dating as a single mother with a child who had survived cancer presented its own challenges. But we had learned that perfect was an illusion anyway. What we had was real: love, resilience, hope, and each other. Looking back, I could see how every terrible thing that had happened, Marcus leaving, the financial struggles, my family's abandonment, Isabella's diagnosis, had led us to where we were now. Not because I believed everything happened for a reason, but because we had chosen to find meaning in our pain, to transform our survival into something that could help others survive too. Sometimes people asked me if I would change anything if I could go back in time. Would I prevent Isabella's cancer? Would I make different choices in my marriage? Would I pursue a more practical career path? The answer was complicated. Of course I would spare my daughter the pain and fear of cancer if I could. Of course I would protect my family from financial hardship and emotional trauma. But I also knew that our journey through darkness had led us to a light we never would have found otherwise. Sometimes people asked me if I would change anything if I could go back in time. Would I prevent Isabella's cancer? Would I make different choices in my marriage? Would I pursue a more practical career path? The answer was complicated. Of course I would spare my daughter the pain and fear of cancer if I could. Of course I would protect my family from financial hardship and emotional trauma. But I also knew that our journey through darkness had led us to a light we never would have found otherwise. This question came up frequently during interviews and speaking engagements, and I had learned to answer it thoughtfully rather than with my immediate emotional response. During a particularly memorable interview with a local television station, the host pressed me on this point. "But surely," she said, "given everything your family went through, the illness, the financial strain, the abandonment by people who should have supported you, surely you would go back and change things if you could?" I paused, considering my words carefully. Behind the cameras, I could see Maya in the green room, holding up an encouraging thumbs up. Isabella and Grace were at school, but I knew they would watch the interview later, and I wanted my answer to honor their experience honestly. I think that question assumes that difficult experiences are automatically bad experiences, I finally said. And that's not always true. Isabella's cancer was terrible, yes. The fear and uncertainty and pain were real and devastating. But that experience also taught us things about love and resilience and human goodness that we never would have learned otherwise. I went on to explain how our crisis had revealed the extraordinary kindness of strangers like Maya, how it had deepened the bond between my daughters and me, how it had led me to discover my voice as a writer and advocate. None of these silver linings diminished the trauma we had endured, but they were real and valuable nonetheless. What I would change, I continued, is not the experience itself, but the systems that made it unnecessarily difficult. I would change a healthcare system that bankrupts families dealing with childhood illness. I would change a culture that judges single mothers and assumes they're somehow less capable of providing for their children. I would change attitudes that treat cancer families like inspiration porn rather than human beings dealing with complicated, ongoing challenges. The interview went viral on social media, with parents of chronically ill children sharing it widely and commenting on how my perspective had helped them reframe their own difficult experiences. It also caught the attention of healthcare policy advocates, who invited me to speak at conferences about the intersection of medical crisis and social support systems. This led to an unexpected new chapter in my advocacy work. I began collaborating with organizations working to reform healthcare delivery for families with seriously ill children. My story provided a human face for policy discussions about family medical leave, insurance coverage for experimental treatments, and support services for siblings of children with serious illnesses. Testifying before the state legislature about proposed improvements to family medical leave policies was both terrifying and empowering. Sitting at a table facing dozens of lawmakers, I told them about the impossible choices I had faced, between being present for Isabella's treatment and maintaining employment, between advocating for my daughter's care and managing Grace's emotional needs, between accepting charity and maintaining dignity. Policymakers often talk about families like mine in abstract terms, I said during my testimony. We become statistics about healthcare costs or data points about single-parent households. But behind every policy decision are real children who need their parents present during the scariest time of their lives, and real parents who shouldn't have to choose between their child's health and their family's financial survival. The bill I testified for passed 6 months later, expanding family medical leave protections for parents of children with serious illnesses. It was a small victory in a much larger fight, but knowing that other families might avoid some of the impossible choices we had faced felt profoundly meaningful. My advocacy work also led to connections with researchers studying the long-term impact of childhood cancer on families. I participated in several studies examining topics like post-traumatic stress in parents of pediatric cancer patients, financial toxicity in families dealing with serious childhood illness, and resilience factors that helped families thrive after treatment. One study, conducted by Dr. Sarah Martinez at Oregon Health and Science University, followed families for 5 years after their child's cancer diagnosis. The research revealed patterns that resonated deeply with my own experience. The initial crisis phase where families focus solely on survival, the adjustment period where they learn to navigate new realities, and the integration phase where they found ways to incorporate their experience into a meaningful ongoing life story. What we're finding, Dr. Martinez explained when she shared the preliminary results with participating families, is that families who are able to find meaning in their experience, whether through advocacy, creative expression, helping other families, or other forms of purpose-driven activity show significantly better long-term outcomes in terms of mental health, family functioning, and overall quality of life. This research validated what I had instinctively understood, that our trauma had been transformed into purpose not as a denial of its difficulty, but as a way of ensuring that our suffering had meaning beyond itself. The financial stability that came with my book success and speaking career allowed me to make choices I hadn't been able to consider during our crisis years. I was able to reduce my security guard hours to part-time, giving me more time for writing and advocacy work. More importantly, I was able to be present for my daughters in ways I hadn't been able to when survival demanded all my energy. I could attend Isabella's art shows without worrying about lost wages. I could volunteer in Grace's classroom and help with field trips. I could take the girls on weekend camping trips and summer vacations, small adventures that had been impossible during our hardest years. These ordinary privileges felt extraordinary to me. The ability to say yes to opportunities for joy and connection, rather than constantly calculating costs and trade-offs, represented a kind of freedom I had almost forgotten existed. But perhaps the most significant change was in my relationship with uncertainty. During Isabella's treatment, the future had been a terrifying unknown. Would she survive? Would her treatment work? Would we lose our home? Would I be able to hold our family together? Now, 5 years later, I had learned to live with uncertainty as a constant companion rather than an enemy. Isabella's annual checkups still made us nervous, but we had developed rituals and coping strategies that helped us manage the anxiety. We celebrated each clear scan not just as good news, but as another milestone in our ongoing journey. Grace had started therapy the previous year, not because she was struggling, but because I wanted to give her tools to process her early experiences with trauma and upheaval. Her therapist, Dr. Lisa Park, had become another important member of our extended support team. Grace has developed remarkable resilience skills, Dr. Park told me after several months of sessions. She's learned to articulate her feelings, to ask for help when she needs it, and to find ways to help others as a way of processing her own experiences. These are skills that will serve her well throughout her life. Grace's therapy sessions often included art therapy, and she had begun creating her own visual narratives about our family's journey. Her drawings showed a progression from chaos and fear to stability and hope, but they also acknowledged that sadness and worry remained part of our story. "I think it's okay to still feel scared sometimes," Grace told me one evening as we looked through her therapy artwork together. Dr. Park says feelings are information, and scared feelings tell us to pay attention and take care of each other. Her emotional wisdom continued to amaze me. At 8 years old, she had already internalized concepts about emotional regulation and resilience that many adults struggled to understand. We had learned that strength isn't about never falling down, it's about getting back up again and again, even when you don't think you can. We had learned that family is created not just by birth or marriage, but by the people who choose to love you when love is difficult. We had learned that art and storytelling can be acts of healing, not just for the creator, but for everyone who encounters them. Most importantly, we had learned that even when the lights go out, even when everything seems lost, there is always the possibility of dawn. It might be faint, it might be far away, but it's always there, waiting for us to be brave enough to keep walking toward it. As I finished writing our story, I could hear Isabella and Grace laughing together in the next room, and I smiled. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges and joys, but tonight we were together, we were healthy, and we were home. And that was enough, more than enough. It was everything.